Bienvenidos. Welcome to the 47th annual convening of one of the most enriching experiences in our community, the celebration of diversity and traditions known as Tucson Meet Yourself. I am Supervisor Betty Villegas, and on behalf of the Pima County Board of Supervisors and all the residents of our beloved community, I am happy you can join us. Pima County is a mix of ancestral cultures with lifetime and longtime residents and our new arrivals, all sharing the air, the land, and the history of the beautiful Sonoran Desert. Lucky for us, we also share the foods, dances, music, manual arts, and rituals of dozens of different cultural communities and folk groups, all of which call Pima County home. Every year, Tucson Meet Yourself, sometimes referred to as TMY, is our community's shared big tent where we discover, respect, and celebrate each other. Congratulations and thank you, Tucson Meet Yourself organizers, for adapting this year's 2020 festival to the new public health precaution guidelines. This year, TMY has reframed the event to include a socially distanced virtual experience that offers each of us an opportunity to be connected while remaining safe. There is so much beauty, strength, and resilience in every one of our cultural traditions, and I encourage you to join us in support and celebration of them all. Please enjoy all the offerings, and remember, we will get through all the challenges because we are Pima County strong.
Welcome to this program, part of the 2020 edition of Tucson Meet Yourself Reframe. I want to take this moment to thank our sponsors. Without their generosity, none of these wonderful offerings would have been possible. First, our major sponsors: Pima County, the City of Tucson, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Arizona Commission on the Arts, the Arts Foundation for Tucson and Southern Arizona, and the University of Arizona College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and the Southwest Center. In addition, I want to thank our presenting sponsors, businesses that stuck with us even in these difficult times. Thank you to Cox, Tucson Electric Power, Visit Tucson, Desert Diamond Casino, and Chicanos por la Causa. Enjoy the program.
Welcome from the traditional homelands of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the Pasquayaqui tribe to Tucson Meet Yourself Reframed. Today's Tradition Tuesday panel discussion has been curated to honor and share traditional knowledge in our region, the Southwest, and the US-Mexico border corridor. Through the voices and experiences of traditional artists and community members, you will learn about distinctive cultural expressions, how they are preserved, and how they endure and thrive in everyday folk life. Today's discussion will explore textiles in the Americas as a form of cultural resistance, economic autonomy, and women's collective empowerment. I'm greatly honored to be joined here by our facilitator, Dr. Michelle Téllez. Dr. Téllez is an assistant professor in the University of Arizona Department of Mexican American Studies. She writes about transnational community formations, Chicana feminism, and gendered migration for academic journals, books, and as a public scholarship. A founding member of the Chicana Motherwork Collective, the Arizona Son Jarocho Collective, and the Binational Arts Residency project, Dr. Téllez has a long history in grassroots organizing, projects, and community-based arts and performance. She is co-author of the Chicano Motherwork anthology, Porque Sin Madres No Hay Revolución, published in 2019, and the author of Autonomy in the Spaces of Neoliberal Neglect, forthcoming in 2021. With that, I'll pass it on to Michelle Téllez.
It is an honor. Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you to Tucson Meet Yourself for creating this opportunity for us to be in conversation, to continue learning from one another, to build community despite the things that are happening in our world, and ways to find possibilities of hope, connection. It's very important. So I'm really honored to be here. I'm honored to be on this panel with an all-women lineup. They're doing incredible work in their communities. They're amazing artists. And I'm just here to help facilitate a dialogue. So thank you. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna have each artist convey a little bit about what their work is, and then we'll move into a conversation format. And I'm gonna start with our first artist, NANSI Guevara. NANSI Guevara is a designer, artist, and teacher based in Brownsville, Texas. Sorry about that. Originally from Laredo, she holds a bachelor's in fine arts in design from the University of Texas at Austin and a master's in education from Harvard University. She is currently focused on design, education, and community public art to create spaces of resistance and affirmation and economies of community, cultural wealth, and support. She is a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a textile rascuache-based public artist. She runs her own freelance design and education practice, Corazón Contento, based out of Brownsville, Texas, and is an adjunct lecturer at the School of Art at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. NANSI has been awarded residencies, fellowships, and grants from the NEA, Art Place America, Fulbright, A Blade of Grass, and NAWAC. Welcome, NANSI. We look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, thank you, Michelle. And thank you to Tucson Meet Yourself and for you folks creating this wonderful space for all of us to share. And I'm happy and excited to just share space with my compañeras and also get to listen to their amazing work. So I'm gonna show some of my work and also talk a little bit about how I came to art and textiles. So I came to art through rascuachismo. I naturally started finding just scraps of material around my house, fabric, wood, and I started making objects and art out of them. My mind was blown when the first time that I heard the term rascuachismo in college, taking a Mexican-American studies class and really reading the writings of Tomás Ibarra Frausto and Amelia Mesa Baines around rascuachismo and domesticana, right? And that really, really spoke to me and really, I related to really starting making at home with my mom, who I saw sewing with her sewing machine and her teaching me, and us making stuff like curtains and pillowcases and just things to really make our home. And so I remember one of the highlights of my childhood being going to the store and being able to pick out a few yards of fabric from the dollar bin. My mom was like, okay, pick two. And I was just like, okay, I'm gonna pick two. And this was a rush of excitement for me because I was like, oh my God, what will I make? And I started to kind of imagine the different things I would make with fabric. And I also watched my mom sew and design some of our Halloween costumes. One year she decided to dress me up as an angel, and I think it was her hopes that one of us would become a nun. But she also made us clothing. So she made these matching blouses with these skirts, and that's a skirt / short. Yeah, and she would make these outfits for us, and I was just in awe, and I was like, Mom, can you show me how to use your machine? And she showed me. And so later she shared that so my grandma and my great grandma come from a tradition of street vending. And my mom was also a street vendor since she was 10. And when she was a teenager, she kind of felt like she wanted more options. And so she decided to take a technical training class in Mexico around pattern making and sewing. And so this for her was a very kind of empowered moment because she could have more choices in the work that she took in Nuevo Laredo as a woman in the 60s. So I learned that craft from my mom. She worked at a dress maquila. And when I moved back to South Texas after 10 years of being away, that was when I moved back to, I'm originally from Laredo, but I moved to Brownsville about 4 years ago. And that's when I got the chance to kind of reconnect with that, with my love of sewing and just really having access to these array of fabrics. And so I also, as I connected back to my love of sewing, I also connected to a wonderful community of costureras here in Brownsville. And they're just amazing. Like the knowledge that I know, I'm like, I know very little compared to like the 50 years that some of these women have been sewing. And really, they've been my teachers and really learning about not only the technical, but also everything that, like all the labor and the long hours that they spent and the maquila, and finally gaining some economic stability, and then the maquila's closing is just this reoccurring kind of exploitation of labor. And so also finding that same trade that helped these women in the community, because they do share kind of these like similar narratives to my mother, is that that same trade that helped these women become independent became commodified and exploited labor through these maquilas. And so I also was reminded of this time when I was in a conference, and they had made this distinction between low-skilled and high-skilled immigrants. And I was sort of like, And I was like, that's kind of bullshit. And I just quite didn't understand why they were making that differentiation. Obviously, these folks don't know what it takes to work an industrial sewing machine, and really understand that these women are responsible for mass producing clothing, which is something that is a basic necessity. And they're essentially creating large profits for corporations that are devaluing their bodies, their time, and their skill sets. So I started to work with women to make large-scale fabric pieces that focused on women leaders in Brownsville. Some of these examples are, so they're like 12-foot tall fabric murals that I used to call them. And some of them are representative of a particular woman leader in the community. And there's one in specific that says, siente nuestro poder, that really talks about the power I see in these groups of women, and just really entering these spaces, these homes where women were organizing and holding meetings for health, meetings to organize around migration, meetings to defend immigrant rights. I mean, really, these women putting in their time, despite having full-time work and a family, really putting in time from their homes to organize. And this, it was a kind of a reflection of that experience of me entering that space and really feeling just kind of like the poder and the energy of these women, and just taking notes and learning from them. And so these large pieces were also meant to be sort of like altar pieces, where other women could also see themselves reflected. Yeah, these women are survivors, and definitely during the last 4 years, I have tried to understand this strength and also understand that it is also in me. And so I think of these pieces almost as retablos, and really throughout these years also I've really had to cultivate my own spirituality and really strengthen my kind of my spirituality, if that makes sense. um, but looking at these images of that I want to see reflected, um, images and objects that I can pray to, that are inspired by many spiritual worldviews. I grew up Catholic, and obviously I'm inspired by Catholic imagery, but also really making intentional kind of objects and images that I feel connected to, and then that I can also pray to. Images that I don't really want images with patriarchy. I want images that reflect the strength and power we have as women. Um, and I also need images that help me maintain that hope for the future. And so in Brownsville, I work communally using art and design to shift narratives of costureras and street vendors. Costureras and street vendors are like my heart. That's where I come from. And I work to uplift their work and advocate on the city level to create more economic opportunities for them locally. I have organized making workshops. For example, the Manualidades Festival that was part of uh, the work of Las Imaginistas. And yeah, that was a space for us to kind of come together and share our knowledge. There was a table with embroidery. There was a table with sewing with a sewing machine. There was flower making out of paper. So all these women came together and kind of got to share knowledge and space and make stuff together. So I really believe that we don't only need spaces to share arts and culture, but we need local economic opportunities, and opportunities for folks to thrive with their ancestral knowledge, with their community cultural wealth and skills that they've developed for so much of their lives. And I see making food and sewing and growing food as critical skills for survival, and they're skills of the future, I think, survival on this planet. And they are not low skills. Both my mom and my grandma emit this very strong energy, and they're two norteñas that are just having a convo, but they sound like they're yelling, and they don't know how to lower their voice, and they are gonna make sure that they are heard. I come from that family. And so really just I've been reflecting a lot about just being back in the South Texas border for the last 4 years, and really spending the first 18 years in Laredo, really just reflecting and making sense, and also thinking that there's like a lot of pain for me in the South Texas border, and also what I love so much and where I come from is on the South Texas border. And so both of these things exist in this space. Yeah, I've just been reflecting on a lot of the things that, my experiences on the South Texas border, and really understanding that there's a lot of pain for me on the South Texas border, but also it's a space where there's a lot of love, and a place that I love, and a place where I'm from. And so through understanding this and really through understanding this and through acknowledging this love of my place, I can begin to imagine that there is something better possible for us here. And not only something better is possible, but it will be the future for us. We don't want to be so strong all the time. And this is what my love for this place is, what maintains my hope that it will be better. And yeah, that's it. And I really appreciate, again, the time and the space to share my work. And I thank you all so much.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much for that beautiful description and giving us some hope there. So I'm going to move to our next speaker. María del Carmen Parra CANO is a mommypreneur of Indigena and Sana Sana Foods. Maria is a Chicana Indigena born in Phoenix and grew up in Barrio Garfield along with her siblings. Maria received her undergraduate degree from Arizona State University, her MBA from Grand Canyon University, and a culinary arts degree from Scottsdale Culinary Institute Le Cordon Bleu. Maria is a mother of 4 children, ages 2 to 7 years old. She's a wife, a sister, an aunt, community organizer, danzante y mujer de ceremonia as part of the Calpoli Nahualcalco. She is also co-founder and the executive director of the Cihuapacli Collective, board member for the Sagrado Galeria and the Orchard Community Learning Center in South Phoenix. Maria provides postpartum support as a comadrita doula and provides rebozo support and workshops for use throughout the life cycle. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you everybody. Thank you for having me and allowing the space to share a little bit about what I've been doing the past few years as becoming a mother and my evolution within that world, right? And so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. Again, so thank you for this opportunity to share about Indigena, also about some of the work we've been doing along with kind of my worlds interweaving, kind of like that telar or that loom, right? Of weaving together all the different life strands that we have, right? We have as mothers, as women, as organizers, caregivers, artists, cooks, everything. So it's all interwoven here. Along with Indigena, I first like to acknowledge my family, my ancestry, as well as those of this territory, our Autumn relatives in Arizona. My family migrated here in the 80s, originally from Texcoco, Mexico, which is right outside of Teotihuacan. And my father's family is Raramuri, right outside of Cuauhtemoc, Chihuahua. Actually meeting in Texcoco, having, I want to say maybe about 6 kids along the way throughout Mexico up to Juarez, where our family, some of my siblings were born in Juarez, and Chihuahua and El Paso. And then eventually making it here to Arizona, actually being sponsored through, it was actually a mariachi who sponsored my parents to live in Arizona on a visa because they were traveling so much. My parents are actually would make mariachi outfits. And so we were used to just packing up and going with them anywhere, whether that be in Tucson. I mean, I have so many memories of being in a car and eating in a car because we were traveling so much as a child with my siblings, being the translators for them because they only spoke Spanish, and so these are some of the outfits that they would actually make, the trajes de charro, trajes de escaramuza. So we grew up in this. My mom was a seamstress for over 40 years, a sastre mexicana. We knew almost all the charros, all the mariachis. I mean, Tucson, they made a lot of the trajes there. She unfortunately passed away in 2014, but she was a womb worker, herbalist, a traditional cook. And I could only aspire to live up to the type of person she was, and I miss her so much. In 20, actually, so I'll go back a little bit as to how Indigena started. And Indigena is mainly focusing on fair trade garments from Mexico and also from Guatemala. And when I first became a mother in 2013, I had been working in the nonprofit world for many years. And so when that stopped, once I became a mom, I kind of had to sit back and revision like who I am as a person now, like my identity. I kind of felt like I had to reevaluate my identity, right? And knowing as a woman, having been completely independent, now a mother, I was actually laid off, told that my timing was off when it came to birthing my child. And so I was pissed off about that. And so kind of had to reevaluate, like, how am I going to provide for my family along with building this system for my daughter? At the time, it was only one. How am I going to show her how to provide for herself? And so then I kind of went off of what my mom had always showed us was, you know, we grew up next to the sewing machines, being very an entrepreneur. We grew up in that house. So so this kind of was birthed from that. Like, how can I, at this point already, my mom had passed. So how can I not only pay tribute to my mother, but also continue this work, continue her work, continue this aspect when it comes to now, who am I, what do I need to be, and how do I need to move forward? So there's a short video of that I wanted to share, giving back some background here.
My name is Maria del Carmen Parra CANO, known to most as Carmen. I, along with my husband Brian, have two beautiful little girls, Yolewa Luna and Kisani Teshkotli. In my 2.5 years as a stay-at-home mom, I have been able to grow as a person and most importantly as a wife and mother. Prior to becoming a mother, I worked in the nonprofit area for over 10 years. This past year was difficult for our family with the unexpected passing of my mother, Maria Cristina Parra. My mother was a tailor for over 40 years and brought her family to Arizona from Mexico in order to sustain her family through the art of sewing. My mother made authentic mariachi suits, outfits for ballet folklorico, wedding dresses, quinceañera dresses, and much more. Her passing affected not only her children and grandchildren, but hundreds of clients and community members that considered her a friend. My mother gifted me my first ring sling, which is made out of fabric from Guatemala. It was given to me prior to my first daughter being born, and I use it daily. Being an active baby-wearing mom and seeing how this tradition is such a trend within mainstream society, I've created Indigena as a method to continue our traditions and support women along the way. In supporting women, I have began a partnership with a collective of traditional weavers in Guatemala who were left to sustain their community after losing coffee crops in the area due to a hurricane. At this point, my family has already made the initial investment of purchasing some fabrics to launch, as well as membership fees to the Baby Carrier Industry Alliance, and are prepared to manufacture each item in our home. Though using these types of carriers has existed for centuries, the baby wearing industry is highly regulated by the federal government. Part of these regulations require prototype testing prior to putting these items on the market. Without testing, a business runs a risk of huge liability, fees, and persecution. Assisting in this project would make a huge impact to parents who need baby wearing to assist them in doing housework, schoolwork, or just nurturing and caring for their little ones of all ages and backgrounds. The purchase of a wrap or ring sling would allow for sustainable support for the collective women of Guatemala to not only continue their indigenous tradition of weaving, but in feeding and supporting their families.
So with Indigena, like I mentioned, is that mommypreneurship. What did I need to do to be able to provide for my family and move forward? So this is where I started doing, really reconnecting with what the traditional teachings my mom had actually shared with me. And that was through sewing, through cooking, education. Like I mentioned, my mom was a womb worker. So it's like relearning some of the stuff that she had shared with us as children of how to care for our bodies postpartum, during pregnancy, how to use the rebozo. My father was actually a huesero too, he would work with people's bones and arms and joints, things like that. So tying things on was something we did all the time, whether it be to heal or even just, different aspects of our body. So the rebozo is actually a tool very significant for my family because we used them constantly. And then also, when it came to baby wearing, the aspect of baby wearing as a mother was nothing new to me, because we would actually care for other kids in the community whenever, like, say, mothers were at work or mothers were in different ceremonies or things like that. We would use the rebozo to care for other people's children, you know, as at the time we were young, we were teenagers and didn't have children of our own, but we always had a rebozo with us, and we would just tie them on and keep them good, you know, to keep the children good while their moms were doing what they had to do. So it could be something very natural for us. With Indigena, I also wanted to source consciously, knowing that, you know, the exploitation of our people has been a long-lasting issue that we've all encountered in different places of our lives. And so sourcing fair trade items from communities, knowing, and women-led initiatives is really important to me, to try to maintain that they're being able to support their own families. Like the video mentioned, you know, in Guatemala, the weavers there actually are the main sustainers in their community due to the coffee crops being eliminated in Guatemala. And so anything as far as the fabric, any contributions we could get to them supports their economy down there. For the weavers in Mexico, we were able to work with them, and I work with them almost weekly, so I'm really close to them. But they are right outside of Texcoco, which is where my family was from. So I was really fortunate to be able to connect with them and find them. And it's a small family. It's a family of traditional weavers, where the abuelitas actually tie the fringe of each rebozo. So that's something really beautiful to hear, that the stories, their prayers, everything is interwoven at the end before they send the rebozos to me. And then the different ways to use the rebozo itself, of different healing ways. So Indigena was born in like 2014. In 2015, 16-ish, by the time I had my second child, that's where the Siwapakti Collective was born, as a way to support me as a mother, caregiver, also see how other women in the community needed similar support when it came to being a parent, you know, and surviving. Really, for a lot of us, even though I'm one of 6 daughters, my mom had done cerradas on us, on most of the ones I have already birthed. But we didn't know this was, for us, it was something common. Like, we knew that, like, caring for your body postpartum, having certain foods, things like that was something common for us. But I know now in this society, it's really hard. You know, it's really hard to know how to care for yourself, especially in being so in that state postpartum, where it's so important for your body alignment and well-being across, you know, to move forward in life. It's very, very essential. So the rebozo being one of those tools to hold you together, whether it be in where if you need a hug, you know, you just use a rebozo and give yourself a hug, to helping heal your womb, helping heal your body, you know, at certain times. So this is where it was really important for us in the collective to show, from an Indigenous perspective, an Indigenous mothering perspective, how do we use these tools, but then what else can we do for each other to support one another to continue to heal? And with these tools, it's also, not only is it the body, womb, self-care, but also how do you care for your children, like I mentioned before. So we do different workshops on baby wearing, being able to use the rebozo during birth, during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum support. So we actually provide workshops and classes on these specific types throughout the lifespan. And then we also incorporate the importance of foods. And this is where under Indigenous food sovereignty is really important to know which foods to treating food as medicine, and then also helping work with that and seeing how is this food gonna help me? How am I gonna help heal my body, essentially? And then, so we provide a lot of postpartum workshops on foods specific, hierbas, as well as foods from the desert. So since we're in the desert, knowing how to cultivate the land, knowing how to reconnect with it that way is really essential. And with the collective, we also see ourselves as promotoras, as health promoters, comadres, to be able to go out and provide training for other people. So we actually hold an ancestral womb wellness gathering once a year where we actually do the classes on using the rebozo, using different herbs, plant medicines to help heal, and just knowing the importance of our traditional indigenous medicines, and not, and making sure that we have those connections with them. And with being able to share our work with others, we also try to maintain our connection bound to, at least from I consider my mother's land, right? My actual motherland is down in Teotihuacan, Texcoco area. So making the connections down there, not only with the weavers, but also with the elders, the caregivers of the territory, the healers, really, the curanderas down there, to be able to continue the work, gain the skills, even if it's tying the rebozo a different way, or maybe we need to fold it double instead of keeping it a single layer, so different techniques to use to try to bring it back and to educate the community here, or help share this information in the area here in Phoenix. So we were very fortunate to make a trip to Teotihuacan in March before everything started shifting for us, and just be able to spend 4 days of ceremony there, to be able to just soak it all up, soak in what we can, continue the conversations of food, herbs, rebozo use, and just really sit and be there with the elements and our elders. So our tagline for Indigena is continuing a tradition. And so it's been really beautiful to be able to see the past few years now working with different birth workers. And also I'd like to touch on briefly, baby wearing and rebozo use a lot is seen commonly within mainstream society, and the notion of cultural appropriation is always questioned and things like that. And so for me, it's really beautiful to see that more and more birth workers of color, or indigenous birth workers, coming to light and going into these traditional healing ways and saying, I'm a partera, I'm a comadrona, however they like to identify, but they look like me, and that's a really important piece to a lot of people. In the when you're during that pregnancy time, you're and I'm sure most of you could probably relate, it's relearning what your body's doing, relearning how you could connect with your body again, and with that child in womb. So how can you make it all connect? So really good to see how the rebozo is being used to bring that back together, tie it all together for birth workers, and also for families, building these strong ancestral bonds, reconnecting with culture, and then also normalizing rebozos to use from even the little ones here to, to even our elders or relatives that are actually buried with their rebozo. So it's very much a relationship-based garment, textile, that I think, is used throughout the lifespan.
Thank you so much. That's so powerful, Carmen. So I'm gonna invite us to move on to our next speaker, Lorena Andrade, who is the director of La Mujer Obrera, an organization in El Paso, Texas, dedicated to creating communities defined by women. Andrade helped organize the women displaced from the garment industry as a result of the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. As the organization grew, Andrade collaborated with committees within the organization to identify, develop, and implement programs grounded in the history of women workers and Mexican indigenous heritage. She also participated in developing the social enterprise side of La Mujer Obrera, Centro Mayapan, which includes Rayito de Sol Daycare and Learning Center, Café Mayapan, and Nummetic Trading Company, which focuses on fair trade. In 2011, Andrade became director of La Mujer Obrera. The organization's programming includes Familias Unidas del Chamizal, a community organization, Proyecto Verde, Museo Maichen, Tierra es Vida Community Farm, and annual cultural events. Welcome, Lorena.
Gracias. I'm Lorena Andrade, and I'm with La Mujer Obrera. Our organization is located right on the border in a neighborhood that we call the Chamizal. When our organization began, it was to organize garment workers. So we are a garment worker organization. And our community was known as the Garment District. But at the beginning, since we started our organization, we were always encouraged to think and imagine what we wanted our community to look like and what it meant to have a community and to work and live here. So at the time we were, fighting the boss, we were always also challenged to see what was the alternative that we wanted to create together. And also there was, when we were fighting against NAFTA or the sweatshops, we have that economic analysis also. And so we're always striving to say, well, what kind of economy would we want as women workers, and what kind of economy and culture and community do we want as garment workers? And so that has really been something that, even if we were doing, the activism within the factories, that is also something that we've always been taught to balance, that defend against, and then create space so that we can be creative in that, allow for us as workers, working class, to be creative. And so that's also always been very important. That's something that's just been a natural part of being in La Mujer Obrera. And also, well, when NAFTA closed down all of our garment industry, we really also began, like I said, we also began to say we're going to take some space. So we got a building, and we were able to do our Café Mayapan, and also a space for our children, which is our daycare center. Because one of the things that, there's an identity that is imposed on us that says that we're an infinite source of cheap labor. But what is our identity, and where does our identity come from? Well, we feel that it comes from healing our relationships with each other and healing our relationships with the earth. And that those are the two basic things that then we're going to create. And with that, because it's always what we already know, the knowledge that we carry, and that this economic system has wanted to deny, or if we're going to practice it, it's going to be in a setting where we're either exploiting the land or exploiting our bodies, right? Or they're exploiting our bodies. So how do we kind of switch that around, not only to the outside world, but to ourselves as women, that we don't believe those things as well. But that comes with the organizing, and that comes with the sharing of knowledge amongst ourselves. So one of the things, like if they're saying it's NAFTA, and of course, naturally for us in Mujer Obrera was like, if we don't agree with NAFTA, then we want fair trade. We don't want free trade, we want fair trade, just like that. And so, and every time we have an idea, it's a task that we need to plan for and implement together, ¿verdad? We have a right to think and plan and implement our ideas collectively. And so that's where we had the idea of starting we didn't really know what, but we knew that we wanted to work with artesanas in Mexico. And so just from that idea and that talking and that working through things, we developed a network of indigenous women's cooperatives in Mexico called Red Numata Napahuica. And so that is something that we helped create that infrastructure or that organization in Mexico. And so since then, we've always had this sharing of knowledge. I mean, they don't understand, the women in Mexico, for example, in Oaxaca or in Puebla, don't necessarily understand what our world looks like on the border with Ciudad Juárez. And, even if most of the women here were born in Mexico, we've never gone south of Ciudad Juárez, right? And so that exchange of experiences brought together what we share, but also how our different relationships, whether it was with the earth or in our communities, sometimes it's difficult for us because we've been behind a sewing machine it's hard for us to remember what community looks like, what community working together and collectively means. And that's the importance of sharing an economy, because we learned that through there, right? And especially creating an economy or like a business like Mayapan or the daycare or anything that we want to do, we have to get rid of what we learned in the factory and those relationships and try to create something that we don't know, that we've never experienced before. So that's something that's really difficult, but that is very necessary, or else we're just going to replicate the same thing, right? While we're surviving in the economic system that exists right now. So so we always say that it's really important for us as garment workers, if we're able to steal some of that time to be creative with our with our mano de obra, with what we do, ¿verdad? And that we can be creative. So for us, that's one of the biggest, like a big part of our resistance, that we carve out enough space for us as garment workers to do that. And so the artesanía, we also do what we call our tianguis in the chamizal. And so in our tianguis, it's already basing it on the fact that we have enough knowledge in our community to build the community that we would like to see. Like, we carry that. We don't acknowledge it many times. We don't think that it's something to share. So how do we create those spaces so that women are comfortable doing that? So that's like at the end of one of our planning meetings, because we plan everything together and we imagine what we want it to be, it will be like, wow, I didn't know we were so smart. Or I didn't know my neighbor knew all this information, or, you know, so there is someone that you can ask for, because the way that the system works here, for example, it's very isolating many times, no? But if we can have this festival, and it's a different way of, like, those festivals are a snapshot of what we can create together, right? And so in all of those tianguis, as we call them, or our festivals, the women themselves are sharing how they sew, how they create, how they paint, how they draw, how they cook food, how they cook their food, the danza, if that's what they do, or teatro. That's always a really popular thing, and so that you know, that they can show why school closure, what's happening with the school closures, or the effects of the contamination in our neighborhood, and they do it through teatro, through drawing, through poetry that they're creating themselves. And so that's kind of how we weave together our community. That's how we're bringing together how we define what that community means, right? And that we are calling it the chamizal because the women says we're going to call it the chamizal, right? So that's why our neighborhood is called the chamizal. It's no longer the garment district or just that neighborhood to the south. So that's always really important, that sense of identity, and how do we create enough spaces for ourselves and the community so all that begins to come together, and more importantly, that we believe it, that we can create it ourselves. That's one of the biggest barriers, because, for example, if we're talking about artesanía, like a blouse, ¿verdad? And everything that goes into it, since we're garment workers, our work was not valued. And so it is work so that our people, that we ourselves value that work. And not only economically, but value what it means to maintaining ourselves as a people or as a community, and to strengthening that, right? So that's a journey for ourselves, because it's that internalized oppression that we carry because of everything that we have to go through and everything that happens to us as women here on the border. And also it helps us maintain that balance of, you know, now they want to shut down their schools. Now they're going to put more contamination in our neighborhood. Now they want to shut down our housing. You know, I have high blood pressure. I have this. And, you know, there's so many things that are going on that sometimes when we're organizing to fight against it, we need that balance. As I said, Mujer de Obrera, we always have that balance of the celebration of who we are and the sharing of the knowledge that we have, so that we also have that sense of defend, but also I have a right to create together, collectively. And so in the process of planning, in the process of the sewing, in the process of the creating, in the process of developing the teatro, and all of those things that in the process of cooking or planting our food, all of that is already teaching us those new sets of those new social relationships, those new relationships amongst each other and with the land that we want. Because we always, as women, many women that migrated from other places to El Paso, which most of us did, is that we always get pushed out, ¿verdad? And now they're pushing us out of our neighborhood. And what if we say, you know, we choose here? We don't want to move. What if we choose here to heal those relationships with this little piece of land that welcomed us, even if no one else did, right? And then how do we preserve that? And how do we build that with that big gift? How do we create the community so that we help the environment, so that we help our children, so that we help each other? And so for us, the weaving and the artesanas is also giving us a different world perspective, ¿verdad? The way the indigenous women talk about their community, how they relate to the earth, how they develop their artesanía, the process that they use, what it is that they're sewing, that helps us get out of this factory work mentality and gives us a different world vision, that we even know that it exists, and a base for us to create and to use that knowledge. No, it gives us a constant context to put in the knowledge that we already carry. Even if many of the women don't recognize that, they come from indigenous roots, we'll get there because they're sharing it. They're sharing it with their neighbors already, right? It's going to be one of those realizations like, hey, I knew that already, or, things like that, or I can share that. And I knew that. So for us, that's the importance of having that connection with the artesanas, of discovering new ways of being, new in terms of relearning, but also discovering the knowledge that we carry in an industrial kind of border community, and that's resistance, and that it's important for us to maintain and create communities. That's all I got.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Lorena. Wow, I am so amazed at the work, the incredible work that the three of you are doing in your respective communities, the networks of support that you're creating spaces in the places that the state will not, or does not, or will not, right? And so, and you're offering these alternative realities connected to ancestral traditions and connected to place, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And I think your work also, there's so many overlaps, but there's a way in which the work that you all are doing demonstrates possibilities of resistance within systems that have long been in place that marginalize and oppress, women along the borderlands, right? And so, and given this, alternative vision around borderland women, I would like to ask each of you to comment on how do you hope that the work that you all are doing is helping to address some of the stereotypes or the myths that exist around the women that you work with in your communities, and how that, so that you can share with the audience a little bit about that. And Carmen, do you want to go first?
Sure. For us, it's been really interesting the past few years, just seeing, because of all these systems that you mentioned, intentionally not being here to serve us, but seeing how we've been bypassing that from the very traditional place, and approaching things from earth to food to healing, So it's been very beautiful to see just so many women looking, yearning, wanting to have not only that connection, but also to continue learning about themselves. And we see many, as being in Phoenix, we're an urban indigenous city, right? And so we see many, many nations from down to Chiapas, all the way up across Sabiayala, so we are pretty much like a central hub for so many indigenous peoples. But it's really beautiful to see when somebody Afro-Cubana identifies and says, I'm Taino, or I'm African. I'm, kind of reaffirming those roots, reaffirming that indigeneity. So, and that could be, and one of the things we always say is everybody's indigenous from somewhere. It's just learning, having that connection to whether it be, something tangible, visiting the place, or just identifying that in what you do. How do you incorporate things in your daily life of knowing who you are and acknowledging who you are? And part of that are those generational traumas of everything that comes with that, right? Like the healing process of, for many women, saying, oh, I didn't learn, I wasn't taught, I wasn't able, I left the res at a very young age, things like that. So the evolution of what it is to be an indigenous person has been really, really beautiful to see, the growth, and then also just even the traditions going down to the children. And that's been really important for us, is seeing how can we make things better for our little ones. And so just the interactions we see with the women has been really, really so touching, very spiritually uplifting, even, because a lot of times we each have like little holes to fill, right? And so it's been really beautiful to see that we've been able to contribute to some of that healing.
Thank you. Nancy?
Hi, I just want to say that I would listen to Maria and Lorena all day. amazing. Working at a factory, whether you're a costurera or a farm worker or like work in packing, is so much work. And I would say that the acknowledgement that the amount of work it takes to produce a garment, especially like indigenous garments, very intricate, there's a lot of time spent, right? And I often tell folks, like, because I see this often of like imports of obviously indigenous textiles and then reselling, and then people wanting to haggle down, and really just like, no, acknowledge that the value of this textile is so much higher than even what they're selling it for. And also like for the folks that import without it being like fair trade, but just kind of take advantage of those prices to import and then resell at a higher. I mean, that's also very like questionable, very wrong process, I think. And just to kind of, yeah, just I think the first step is like acknowledging like the labor and the skill and all the work it takes to create a garment, right? And like Lorena shared, really acknowledging that and within ourselves too, within our communities of that value. And also I think about the trauma that comes from labor and exploitation and women being in factories all day, mass producing, and what that does, you know, sometimes when you love something, right? I know seamstresses and costureras that love their craft, but then what happens when that craft is exploited?
So I think that that's the work that we do, that to defy those myths for ourselves, because the system continues to put that every day. It's a daily message. So it's a daily, like, we have to fight that ideology on a daily basis. It's something that we have to, that's why we defend our spaces so much, because in those spaces, we can maybe silence those for a little bit, even though, you know, you open the door and it comes in. So I think most of the work, even with, you know, in the sweatshops, we were told that our work really didn't have any value because the women were not paid. NAFTA said that we were disposable, that we didn't, you know, they would get asked, what do you know? And the women would say, I don't know anything, because they didn't have a formal education, or I've only worked in a factory. So those are things that have been imposed on us, and then we respond to in that way, because, you know, we're forced to answer those questions or to analyze ourselves in that framework. And so a lot of our work is how do we create a space outside of that framework so that we have a lot of different options, or a lot of a more creative answer to who are we, what do I know, what can I share, what can I contribute to my community. But it is really tough to get us out and to answer those questions and not feel like we're in this box, right? In a framework. And then so we respond in that framework. So that's why, whether it's a festival, whether it's a restaurant, especially our daycare center with our babies, or wherever it is that we are, how do we defend that physical space? I mean, that physical space is important for us, so that we have the opportunity to do that. And we surround ourselves with women that are doing that same work. I think that's been really important for us to be able to figure it out together, and to create that space for each other. Right? So it's a given that yeah, we're gonna create this community. Like, yeah, we can build it ourselves. Like yeah, we're gonna create a restaurant. You know what I mean? And everybody's yelling that we don't know anything about business, and we're like, no, yeah, we can do it. You know, even if all the numbers say that we can't. So I think that's really an important thing that we've been taught in La Mujer Obrera, that part is just a given, and that it's a space where we don't have to defend identity, but create it together.
That's powerful. I mean, and I think I want to sort of like riff off of that a little bit to this idea of ingenuity and also a little bit of like ganas, you know, because in thinking through all of your projects, you know, Nansi uses the concept of rascuachismo, right, to talk about how she creates her artwork, really, in the idea of like creating something what others would see as nothing, creating something out of nothing, or like whatever you see in front of you, you know, we're going to build it and we're going to do something with it, right? And I think that that is reflected in each of your projects and your work. However, I think for the audience, they might be wondering, well, like, how do you go from point A from point B? Like, what does that really signify? What does that really mean? And for me, sometimes I think about, well, that's like the ganas. When you have the ganas to do it, you can make anything happen, right? Because we've been forced to be in positions where we don't have access to a lot of resources. So vamos a hacerlo, we're gonna do this, right? And so I would love for you all to talk a little bit about this idea, like how do you, de la nada, create such beauty, really, you know? Anybody who wants to jump in?
I would say that I feel this like general sense of like, we're tired. We're tired of having ganas, and whoever has access to intergenerational wealth and you know, capital in the form of money just needs to open up their wallet and funnel resources. And I really do believe in like kind of redistribution of like resources. And but you're right. I mean, it's almost like because there's a lot here. There's a lot in Brownsville. There's a lot in Laredo, where I grew up. And so it's just like really finding that time and space to bring that beauty out. And yeah, that's what I would say with that one.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and jump in. So it's really funny that you mentioned that, Michelle, because I remember it reminded me of my mom, because she would also say like, I feel like I get a lot of the drive from her. And so the ganas and everything has to do with, that's what I grew up seeing, you know, and she would always say like, you want to do something, you got to do it yourself. Like they're not going to do it for us. And so that's always been my little empuje, you know, of like, you know, and essentially even with Indigena, I was like, what do I know how to do? I know how to cook, I know how to sew. So then I started doing stuff, you know, that way. And then even with the Ciapacli Collective, I felt like when that started, it was because I put out a call for support, because I didn't know at that time, I needed the support as a new mom after losing my mother. And then I was like, I don't know what to do with a second kid, you know, like I have no idea what I'm doing. And so how can we build a community? So now, you know, that's 5 years old this past week. And so now it's like, how do we help other people be at a better place when it comes to that? And speaking of physical space, we actually opened an office space this week, and I'm actually sitting in here for the first time. Yeah, so yay. But hopefully that'll transition to more, and maybe we outgrow this space, you know, who knows. But also having the rebosos here for people to use, different areas of this little space to receive treatments or healings, you know, and much of the people that do this type of work don't have an actual place to do it, right? It's always like in people's homes, or no se habla, you know, right? Or people know somebody that does something, you know, and now making it okay. And it's like, how can we legitimize the work, that spiritual work, that healing work, by actually hiring people to do that? Or how can we legitimize this traditional work in these new systems, right? So it's also, how do we learn to navigate these different worlds, right? And so that's where I think the social enterprise aspect comes in very heavily, to where we bring in, if we don't know how to do something, we bring somebody in the community. Hay una comadre que sabe y que nos puede ayudar, you know, kind of like what Lorena was saying. People know, they just, you know, at times it's hard to think of it in a different in that non-capitalistic viewpoint, you know? So, but how do we make things work for us? Or how do we make sure that healer gets paid for what she's doing? How can we make sure that that birth worker is catching babies, doing what they love, but getting compensated for it, you know? So it's all just it's a working system.
Yeah, so I think that for our organization, I think we always are planning or envisioning. So we might not have the resources at the moment, but if we're able to pressure and get them, we know what we're gonna do with them because we've thought about it for so long and we've been thinking about the whole thing. And the other thing that I think sometimes is important to is that it's not only having access, you know, to the project or having the resources to do it at the moment, but the maintaining of it and the defense of it is probably even more difficult, especially if we really are working together and creating something that is different. It's the pressure that you get from the outside can be really incredible. So a lot of the work, or a lot of the cooperative work that we construct, we have to fight to sustain it on a daily basis. Not only economically, but because so many things happen to us as women when we walk out of here or when we go back to our lives. So it's also a daily defense of, and a daily survival. And then how do we be creative when we're in survival mode? Probably every day. So I think that's something that we need to acknowledge as well, that it's not like, oh, we have Café Mayapan, for example, and now everything's fine. From there, the battle really starts to make sure that we create it the way that we envisioned it, or that we incorporate the lessons and modify, you know, maybe the camino, because we're creating it as we go along. And then also just defending that space to make sure that we're still here, that we can hold on to it. So I just wanted to present that as well, that it's not like we have it and then it's there forever. It's a daily defense of, and then being creative in that survival mode, which is something that we as a people have been having to do for a long time. But I think that if we can carve out that space for creativity, that's where the hope comes in, and that's where I can take a little breath to celebrate who we are is also important. That's why we're always cooking and celebrating.
Absolutely, I love that. You know, there's a professor, and I talk about this too, but he termed it, Roberto Cintli Rodriguez calls it creation resistance, right? So as you're resisting, you're also creating. And I always, you know, learn from this elder who told me, no hay que luchar para destruir, hay que luchar para crear, right? So we mustn't struggle just to destroy, we must struggle to create. So what are we creating in our work together, right? And I think you all speak to this, that it's not just about like what one person knows, right? It's about what we can create collectively, right? And so building on each other's skills, building these networks across borders between communities, right? And then rooted in place, which I think is fascinating and very important. Now we've run out of time. I do want to say that I want to acknowledge one thing though, that you all have acknowledged the intergenerational knowledge that is brought from your ancestors, from our ancestors, and especially our madres, our mothers, right? And I really want to say thank you for really bridging that knowledge, right? Because we're not often told that the knowledge systems that come from our homes, that they're not valuable, right? And here, what you all are really demonstrating is that the knowledge that we learn in our homes with our mothers really is something that shapes our life and shapes how we understand the world in which we live in. And when we're taught to forget it, it's not useful, right? And so by the reclamation of those systems, I think is absolutely important for us to recognize. Now, and just a quick, closing, I really do think that all of you also, in creating these possibilities, right, really also acknowledge this idea of hope, of possibility. So maybe in closing, and I know that Lorena, you just mentioned this too, right? Because, through it all, we live, right? And how do we live when the conditions can be, so oppressive? So I think if you could comment maybe just briefly, each of you, about what hope signifies to you and what drives this work. So thank you.
Hope for me, I think just moving forward is, we speak of our future generations. And for me, it's always, I have 3 daughters, and so now them looking to see what I could teach them and how can I make their lives better. And that's what the hope is for me, for my own children and for the other children that we interact with, and seeing how they have their own connection with the rebozo, their own connection with medicines, or their own connection with the land.
Yeah, I would say that so when you mentioned knowledge systems, I also feel like not in like entering spaces where your knowledge systems from home are not acknowledged or even welcomed is very damaging. And so it's like, yeah, it's super important to hold on to our ancestral knowledge and these knowledge systems from home. And like Lorena said, I mean, these 2 women have said it perfectly, and that I think my hope is in art, is in creating, and is in creating in community, and sharing skills and learning from other community members, and just making together. That's the space where I find hope. And also what you mentioned about luchar para crear was very powerful for me. And so, and yeah, Lorena's right with imagining and creating these new systems versus the systems that we're, almost used to, that exploit our labor. And so how do we continue this work? And yeah, I appreciate so much both Maria and Lorena for sharing all their work and just their words. I'm like in awe.
Well, thank you. I learned a lot today from all of you, and I think for us, it's for me. I guess it was about me. For hope is for me personally, the relationship with the children that we have here. Like we're always. I may not get along too well with adults all the time, but with children, for some reason, I feel very comfortable. So it's always important for us to. It's already. We've done a lot of challenging ourselves to heal that relationship with our children, how we rethink that in our minds, and to learn from them. And I think that a lot of the learning is from a lot of the work that we do is just the youth or whatever age you are. They're always at the table if they want to be, to think and plan the tianguis or the festivals. They give workshops, or they're always being assigned work as well, things like that. So I think to me that's important, and how can we create something so that they think it's just natural, and that they have a community that they're going to learn from, not just the school system, but they have a community that they're learning from and sharing their knowledge with, and that their experiences are just as valuable, and they are contributing to that creation of community. So the adults don't always understand it, but I'm glad that the kids don't have that block yet. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that that's a real source of knowledge also for the work that we do in our organization.
If you are so moved to make a donation to support this work and continue to support the work that's happening in community, please do so. And thank you again to all of our panelists and facilitators for leading us on a journey that really helps us imagine new systems, new ways of creativity in a year in which we are also gathering in a reframed reimagination, an attempt to animate the social imaginary in this digital form. So thank you deeply, and we look forward to all of you joining us again on Tucson Meet Yourself Reframed 2020.